All right. Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing? Good to see you. Do we have any announcements we need to make before we get started? Don't know of any changes. Hello. Do remember those that are on the sick list, maybe with a call or a card or a visit, and those that are on the prayer list. All of them. Some of them are able to get out, such as Penny and Roy, but some are still not able to get out. Carol is not able to get out. Marty's still not able to get out. George is having a little rough go. We want to remember him in our prayers. And if you've got a joke for the day, if you'll call him and tell him, he'd appreciate that. I did something stupid. What was it, Friday? Yeah, Friday. And he said he really appreciated that. That made his day. So I said, I wanted to tell him I didn't. He's probably listening this morning. Just stay around me all day, every day. There's something stupid that always comes up. So anyway, Genesis 37 is where we are. Genesis 37. Joseph is where we are now. Jacob, we've pretty much, if you will, we're still going to see Jacob, but we've put to bed, so to speak, the story of Jacob. We've moved on. Now, that's like I say, we're still going to see Jacob, but we're getting into the story of Joseph. And the story of Joseph is really one that I enjoy reading and thinking about and talking about, because in it we will see the providence of God and how really God works in us and through us. And that's a really great mystery, that providence of God, isn't it? Because we want to understand, well, how does God work through us, and how does God get all this master plan done? And I don't think we really understand it. I don't think it's really spelled out in the Bible. I think it's one of those things that by faith we just accept. And I think a lot of times we look back in our life and we say, well, there was the providence of God. And I'm not sure you can do that, because I believe really to say, well, this is the providence of God, you have to have what's called a divine interpreter, which just simply says this is the providence of God, because some things just work out without, if you will, God just staying back, and it just works out. And then some things are the providence of God. And so we're appreciative of it. We always say God is in control, and we have great faith in that and believe it to be so true. Like I say, I can look back in my life and see the providence of God, or what I believe to be the providence of God. And he has truly blessed me. And I am so thankful for that. But then if you move on with that and you see the story of Joseph, you not only see the providence of God, but you also see forgiveness and how we are to forgive others. We don't always see eye to eye on people. And the story of Joseph starts right here. Sadly, in many ways, at least to me, it seems as if the problem of Joseph and his brothers may have not necessarily been Joseph himself, but may have been the father. And so it's a mindful thought for us as parents and grandparents to really not show favoritism for whatever reason. Now, granted, if we have, of course, Suzanne and I only had one child, but if you have more than one child, there are certain things that one child may have more in common with you than the others. And we laugh. Our two nieces that my sister and brother-in-law have, they love each other dearly, but they're very different. And they look different. One looks like one side of the family, and one looks like the other side of the family. One's a little bit darker complected than the other, and so they're in many ways different. But like I say, we love them tremendously, love them dearly, and their spouses and their children. But we need to be careful that we treat everybody really, not just our own kids, but we treat people, and we treat them fairly, and we treat them with respect, and we treat them with love. And we'll see all of that in this story. So let's get into it. Joseph has a dream. Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger or a sojourner, a pilgrim. Different versions have that word there. It just means he wasn't settled. In the land of Canaan, this is the history of Jacob. This is the generation or generations of Jacob. I didn't realize this till I got to look at this week. That statement is found 10 times, history of, in Genesis. This is the last time in Genesis we will see it. But it was, for whatever reason, I hadn't caught on to that in these years, but it's just a little tidbit. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, and his father's wives. Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Well, we see Joseph, we see him 17 years of age, and it's kind of interesting because if you go down to verse 17, it seems as if they were both, verse 7, and you combine that with what is said in verse 2 and 3. They were not only shepherds, or not only, if you will, had livestock, but they also farmed the land. And Joseph brings back a troubling report, bad report to his father, certain of his wives. Doesn't explain any further, doesn't say anything further. It just says he brought back this report. Worsby, in his little commentary, says this shows the character of Joseph. Okay, well, I don't know that I could say that. Now, I think we see later on, we do see the character of Joseph. But right here, it just makes a statement, and it just kind of leaves us hanging, and we say, what is it? What went on? Well, I don't know that I can fully answer that question. But he brings back this report, and verse 3 then tells us he's the most loved of the children. And the reason he's most loved is that it says that he was the son of the old age. Now, he's not the youngest. Who was the youngest? Benjamin was the youngest. So Benjamin, if you will, holds even a little greater appeal than say Joseph does, just from the standpoint that he's the son of an old age. But it says that Israel, or Jacob, made him a tunic of many colors. When you look at the Hebrew of this, it really doesn't help us. We often just think, well, he made him a coat of many colors. Well, that's probably the most correct answer. But if you get into the history of the word, it has the idea of the attire that a prince would wear, somebody of nobility would wear. Probably a long sleeve tunic, which was something that they wore in that day and age, but with many colors. It's believed that this was something more of not royalty, but a little higher distinction. And so the coat itself was a telltale, if you will, of what Jacob, or what Israel thought of his son Joseph. And so consequently, it says in verse 4, they saw that their father loved him more, and so they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. And isn't that sad? It's sad that brothers can't get along. Now, brothers from time to time don't, and brothers and sisters sometimes don't, but it's always sad. It is very true that really we talk about dysfunctional families. There's always dysfunction in a family. some way, somewhere along the line. The dysfunction in this family is they can't get along. They can't even speak peaceably to him. Now, maybe there were other things up to this point. Now we'll see in just a second another reason why. But it's interesting to say that at least to this point, the text would allow us to think that the reason that they didn't like Joseph was because of their father's favoritism towards Joseph. Which, like, I'm sorry. It could be. It could be. I mean, the text really, is sort of ambivalent. It's just, it's sad to me. The saddest part is they just can't get along. Can't get along. Can't. The last phrase there in the New King James, could not speak peaceably to him. Speaking peaceably. We're all different, and we all come from different backgrounds. And really, what's called our worldview, all of us, even though we're Christians and meet, in the same building, our worldview is different. That's true in children. It's true in families. There's difference between daylight and dark. My mother was one of 6 children. There's only one alive. My aunt, who lives in Brentwood, is the only one that is still alive. She turned 90 here last summer. They were all different. Now, there was an air about them that was very much the same. But at the same point in time, too, those 6 children, there was 5 girls and one boy, they were all very much different. And, excuse me, when you look at it or when you think about them, they all got along. Now, they did talk about one more than than all the rest of them. But nevertheless, peaceably, we as Christians need to learn from this story, if nothing else. Get along. Get along. We may not always see eye to eye. Things may not always be equal and the same, but get along. And that's what created, at least in part of this trouble, that whatever the trouble was, there was this discord between the two. There's envy that comes up next. So Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more when he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose. I also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaves. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dream and for his words." Now, that stands to reason. Yeah. Yeah. Just shut up. Don't say anything. Yeah. I mean, we need to be masters of our feelings and our emotions. But at the same time, too, folks need to not egg it on a little bit. It is interesting, if you will, that he asked them to hear what he has to say, and they evidently listened. Now, I don't know, you might say, well, that's just them being brothers or their kindness, but whatever. But it's interesting that he asked them, and they did listen. And so they, of course, they asked the legitimate question, well, what does this mean? Does this mean? And remember that in biblical times, of course, dreams were a way in which God revealed himself to folks. But dreams were also seen as that which God spoke to them. Now, as you and I know, because of folks that have studied it, we know that we dream all the time. We dream every night. Now, you may not really remember your dreams. You may not remember them at all, but you do as you're going in and out of the stages of sleep. You do dream. And a lot of it has to do with the way you wake up. But while you may not remember those dreams, your mind is constantly at work. These dreams, of course, he remembers. He dreamed another dream, verse 9, and told it to his brothers. Once again, maybe he should have kept it to himself. But he said, look, I've dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. He kept thinking about it. The idea of keeping it in your mind is the idea of he kept thinking about it. He kept pondering it. Now, because we know the end of the story, we know that there is a fulfillment to this revelation. That this is evidently a revelation from God. It's not just a dream. It's a revelation from God. And we know the fulfillment as they will come later on, and he will help them out, and he will be over them, so to speak. And so, though, what we need to, I think, pick up at least is the hatred grows, the envy grows. Anything else? Yeah. Unless one of the other ladies picked up as his mother. I don't know. I will say this. I did read somewhere where some have said the chronology, we follow Genesis almost as if it is chronologically true. And there are some that are saying that this is some backstory, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that's the answer, but I have read that. And like I say, I don't know the answer, but read that. Anything else? Well, violence occurs, as one way of putting it, as Joseph is sold by his brothers. Joseph's brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, I'm ready. He said, here I am. I'm ready. Send me on. So then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? Now, life would have been easier if they'd had cell phones in that day and age, right? No. I agree. Not really. But the point is that the other brothers were away, making sure the flocks were cared for, the flocks were growing, they were, feeding and tending to them. And so basically Jacob says, hey, Joseph, why don't I send you to check on your brothers? Now, it doesn't say really how far away exactly miles-wise. We kind of get a sense of that they were a few days away because of, if we understand where Shechem was, and we're not exactly 100% sure, but if we understand where Shechem, they're a ways away. And so it's interesting because he's willing to send Joseph to check on them, maybe stay 2-3 days, and then come back and make that journey back. And so it's going to be a while before Jacob would get the answer that he wanted, but nevertheless, he thought it worthy to send him. And so we find Joseph out in the field. He's wandering around, and there's a man that finds him. It's interesting. Look in verse 15. It says, a certain man found him, a particular man. That may mean nothing to you, and in some ways it causes me to have great interest. It pricks my interest, but in some ways I don't understand it. A particular man found him, and he asked him, what are you seeking? Well, he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they're feeding their flocks. And the man said, they departed from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. Dothan is 13 miles even further south than Shechem, if it's where we believe that it was. And so Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, there's a conspiracy then that's made. if you will, against him. Even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming." They referred to him as a dreamer, the master dreamer. We all pick up nicknames along the way, right? Well, his nickname became the master dreamer because he had had these two dreams. He had told his brothers, and they had resented him. They had hatred for him already. They have envy for him, and not only that, but they're probably saying, they're building up their case in their mind, and they've been out with their animals. They've been out feeding them and carrying them places to make sure that they're watered and fed and cared for. And now here's our little brother, Daddy's favorite. He's been at home doing nothing. Now here he comes to check on us. You can just hear them as they make up and they embellish that story. You ever talk to yourself about things that happened, used to happen, did happen in the past? Yeah, well, it's just true. The problem is we have more stories and they're just longer. We do. We deal with ourselves that way. And you can just hear them making that story even worse. And the grinding of the teeth, if you will, maybe not literally, but proverbially, getting worse and worse and worse. They're out there in the fields and there's time to think. There's time to meditate. There's time to envision that. And then not only that, but as the brothers would get together, we don't know exactly how far apart they were in watching the flock, but surely they'd get together, at least in the evenings or mealtime or maybe every other day. They'd talk about baby brother. And so it's getting worse in their minds. And so they're developing this hatred more and more. And so they see him coming afar off and they begin to conspire against him to kill him. And they said one to another, "Look, this is the dreamer coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him, cast him into the pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." They're going to throw him in a pit, probably. Some have said this was probably a dry cistern. There were plenty of those around in biblical times. And so it could very well have been a dry cistern or a hole of some kind, a pit at one time that was dug for something. But they said, we'll just tell everybody, well, a wild beast devoured him. And so they were willing to make up this story. And we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But Reuben was in the line of succession of children. Which one was he? He was the first. He was the oldest. He heard it. He delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." Don't take his life. Don't kill him. And seemingly, as Moses records this incident for us by inspiration, he says he had his own plan going. We'll put him in a pit. We'll leave him for a while. I'll get him out. I'll get him back to Dad. It'll be all right. And so he convinces them, well, let's don't kill him. So it came to pass, verse 23, as kind of an indifference arises, that when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. They took him and they cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. They sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was company of Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites were also who? Also mentioned as the Midianites. We'll see them a couple other times mentioned such a way. The Ishmaelites, the Midianites, and these were all descendants. These would have been descendants, do you remember, of who? Okay, more directly of Abraham. Yeah. coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. So the story, it was bad. It was terrible to begin with. Let's get him. Let's throw him in a pit. Let's kill him. We'll tell everybody wild beast devoured him. We found his remains, so forth and so on. And so then as they see these Ishmaelites coming, Judah comes up with this brilliant plan. So, well, let's just sell him. We'll make some money off of him. We'll sell him as a slave. We'll make a little money. We gain out of it. And so the plan develops. And as it develops, it seemingly gets a little bit worse. But it gets sadder and sadder to think about. They sell him then, verse 28. The Midianites, traders, passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. This was what a slave was sold for. So they sold him for a slave. They indentured him as a slave. But they made then, if you will, some money off of it. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Reuben evidently had been away. Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brother and said, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" All of a sudden there's this feeling of contrition. There's this feeling of upset. There's maybe this feeling, if you will, from Reuben, I shouldn't have been a part of this. Tears his clothes, really a sign of repentance in biblical times. But where am I going to go? Reuben almost feels like all of a sudden the family is torn apart. I wonder, no way of knowing, but I wonder if the other brothers had caught on to Reuben's sort of side plan. I'm going to get him out. I'm going to take him. I don't know. But Reuben all of a sudden says, where am I going? Where shall I go? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, dipped the tunic in blood. Then they set the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Do you know whether it's your son's tunic or not?" Do you know whether it's our brother's tunic or not? Well, what a question of deception. He recognized it. Jacob, that is, recognized it and said, "It's my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn in pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. A sign of grief. Sign of grief. You tear your clothes, you put sackcloth around your waist, especially if it gets next to your body. There's no easy way to describe sackcloth. The way I usually describe it is it's like putting a piece of wool. You ever owned a wool sweater? I never have. I've been close to one or two enough to know I don't want one. But you put that next to you, what do? You just scratch the whole time, right? Well, that's somewhat what sackcloth was like. Usually it was dark in color. It was also made out of goat's hair a lot of times, and so it was a sign of mourning, but it's also a sign of sadness. And so he mourned his son. And notice that he mourned them many days. Mourning lasts a while, a long while. One of the things that I have found fascinating within the last 2 or 3 months, and listen to everything that I'm saying, is that our brotherhood, in coming out of the pandemic, in order to get people interested, churches are having seminars. And one of the big seminars that's going on, because 2 or 3 different ones are actually doing these seminars, are seminars on grief. I see that. I get it. I understand. Grief needs to be understood. Grief is a process. Grief takes a while, and you really never go back to the same place. You go through all those stages, and you get through maybe stage 1 and 2 and 3, and then all of a sudden you're back to 1 again the next day, and it takes years. And I usually tell folks, having done considerable research in grief, I usually tell folks that it will get easier in about 2 years. I didn't say great, I just said easier. And so it's interesting here that there is this grief, and I appreciate the fact that it says that he mourned for his son many days. To understand, grief is not, oh, my whatever passed away, and I feel bad today. Okay, the funeral was yesterday. Why don't I feel better today? Because it takes a while. But grief also comes, and we'll just throw this in as a side point. Grief also comes at any loss. The loss of a pet, the loss of a distant cousin, the loss of a job, the loss of health, any loss, financial loss, any loss. You can have grief, and it lasts for a while. So it does with regards to Jacob. And his sons and all of his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down to the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. You have to hold that verse in. Like I say, we know the story, but the next chapter is an interruption, and we'll talk about that in just a second. What do you have to ask or say, or what lessons might we learn from this chapter that are worthy of discussion? Let's talk about 2 or 3 lessons that we might gain out of it. First of all, there's the importance of unity, being together, being on the same page. Unity, though, does not mean that there's not diversity. There can be a diversity within the group from the standpoint of the group itself, but there can be diversity of thought within the group. But still, the group must be united in that when it comes out saying, okay, this is what's decided, this is what was done. I heard tell of a man, and I knew the man, but this happened when I was not there, that the congregation put the man up for being an elder. He was a deacon in the church, and they put him up before the congregation to be an elder in the church. And this man's stipulation is they put him up before the congregation. If anyone has anything to say that's in a negative light, I will not become an elder in the church. And they had 1 or 2 people that said something, and he never served as an elder. He served as a very, very effective deacon in the church, but not as an elder. Well, I don't know that you're going to get 100% anywhere on anything, on anybody. There is unity that needs to be had. In order for the Lord's body to move forward, you have to be united. May not always agree, may not always see eye to eye, but you have to have a focus of why we're here, what we're doing, what's our purpose, what's our direction, and move forward. With regards to the church, I've seen it, experienced it in folks, and I've seen it in folks. We have to understand that there needs to be a love for the church more than a love for our opinion. And I think Paul addresses that in Romans 14. And so that's part of the unity thing. But then a second lesson that we might learn is listen to others. Listen. But it doesn't always mean you have to buy into what they're saying. And when Joseph told them his dreams, they did listen, and I appreciate that. Those are 2 great lessons, and there's some others that we kind of covered as we went through the verses. But anything anybody want to say?
On the deception that went on several chapters, I just wonder, they sold him for 20 shekels. They had a disagreement on how they would split that up.
Yeah.
He really wasn't there to get
And did you divide it 10 ways or 12?
That caused another.
Yeah, it probably did. Probably did. Should they get a share or not? You know, these sports teams, and I was listening to this, I think this last football season, these sports teams, when they win, say the Super Bowl, or they win like baseball, the World Championship, they they have to decide. They get a if you will, a pot of money at the end. I know who was talking about it. It was John Smoltz from Atlanta Braves. He was talking about it during baseball season last year. He said when the Braves, started winning years ago, started winning at the end, he said we had to decide how to divvy out the money, because it was not just the players. They divvied it out. Do we divvy it out to the clubhouse people? Who do we divvy it out to? And Smoltz made the statement. He said the first year, he said, when we were trying to decide that, he said we were a mess. We didn't know what we were doing. And then he said after that, he said it went off very simply because we understood what we were doing. And so there's always money. There's always a fight. Right, Jim? There's always a fight in families when there's money involved. Anything else? It's all good. Judah and Tamar. Why is this here? I don't know. I read about 4 or 5 guys on this week, and you know what they all said? We don't know why this is here. It does give 2 good explanations. It gives, first of all, kind of a good explanation as far as what a Levirate marriage is, and that's one thing that it does. And it also does kind of give us some information that we will find a better understanding of when we get to the 49th chapter with regards to the birthright. But let's jump into it. We'll get as far as we can get. We'll see what we can see and try to learn some things that maybe God has set out that he wanted us to know. It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brother, visited a certain Adulamite. This was in the foothills, really, in between the sea and the mountains. There was a certain Adulamite whose name was Hara. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he married her and went into her. So she conceived, bore a son, and called his name She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son and called his name Shelah. He was a Chezib when she bore him. Chezib is, or she was at Chezib, I think. I didn't read that right. Chezib was more southwest where they had been. So you have basically the growing of the family. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Now we're not told the nature of his sin. We're not told the nature of his actions, how or what he did, but it just simply says that he was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. So I'll just leave it at that, because that's all I really know. Judah said to Onan, "Go to your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." This was the Levirate marriage, if you will. And biblical times, we've talked a little bit about this. A lady was considered blessed if she had children. And if, for whatever reason, her husband died and she did not have any children with her husband, then a brother of the man was to marry her and to produce children. And so this is sort of the beginnings, or this is the first revelation we have of this happening. And so we see that Onan, verse 9, knew that, excuse me, but Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass, when he went to his brother's wife, that he admitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. Therefore he killed him also. family tragedy keeps growing. And so, as it keeps growing, Onan says, well, she can have an heir, but I can't really claim him as my heir. It would be my brother's heir. Now, maybe it was a lack of love, is what I should have said, a lack of love for his brother. Maybe it was due to the fact that he didn't want the responsibility of taking someone in, taking what would be his brother's heir, even though it was his child, and taking care of him. We don't really know why. He said no, and so he did not fulfill his duties as prescribed here by the Levirate marriage, and so God was displeased. God really realized that this was evil in his eyes, and so God killed him also. So Judah then said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So let my young son grow up. Do you just shake your head at that? I do. I was thinking about that this week. I was reading over that and I thought, yeah, I've studied that and read that before. I don't get it. But that was the request. Now, in the process of time, the daughter of Shelah, Judah's wife, died. Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers in Timnah. This is northwest of Adullam, which we started out with in verse 1. And his father, Hira, the Adullamite. And it was told to Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah. The word Timnah means two fountains. It's believed that there were two water fountains of some sort there in what was called Timnah. But he was going to Timnah to shear sheep. So she took off her widow's garment, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. She's been waiting all these years. She's said, okay, we'll let your baby son grow up. And now all of a sudden she says, okay, he's grown, but my father-in-law hasn't done what he's supposed to. He didn't give me Shelah for my husband. And so she comes up, she takes her garments off, her grief garments, if you will, kind of disguises herself. When Judah saw her, he thought that she was a harlot because she'd covered her face. We covered our face because we were told to during the pandemic. They covered their face in biblical times because that's what a harlot did. There was, if you will, a little bit of the shame that went with that, and so consequently they would cover their faces, and she covered her face, and so Judah, when he saw it, he thought, well, this is a harlot. Then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come in to you, let me cohabitate with you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Kind of a sad story, isn't it? Goes in, ends up being his daughter-in-law, but he's willing to cohabitate with a harlot. She said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? And he said, I will send a young goat from the flock. And so she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it? Then he said, well, what pledge will I give you? And she said, your signet and cord. Signet was a ring, signet ring. These were rings that were often folks that had money had. These were also rings that folks of power had. They were usually, a design, or we would think of today more of a signet ring being an initial ring. And oftentimes you could put those and you could put them in wax, especially when you got a little bit more in time. Signet rings were used when you made a letter, and it was a scroll, let's say, you'd roll the scroll up at the edge, you would put a little drop of wax of something soft, and you take your signet ring and you would mash it into that to get it where it would be your symbol. And so she says, I want your signet and I want your cord. And he says, I want your staff. She wants his personal possessions, is what she wants. And then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. So we're going to stop right there. You've read this story before. You'll read it again. We'll get into the 39th chapter, get kind of back to Joseph again. But it's just, it's sort of a weird story that interrupts. And yet, I think we look at it with the morals that God has given to us. And we see a picture that is just sad, revolting, really. And I understand that. I get it. And it, like I say, every time I read it, it just kind of turns me. And so, but it is interesting because it is there by God for a purpose. Anything else anybody would like to say or add? All right. Jim, will you lead some word of prayer, please?
Father, thanks for the day, and thanks for this time, and let the word and look at it. I would pray that you help us find ways to better our life by looking at your word every day. And help us if we go into worship, that we might set our thoughts around you and your son. We sing together, praise you.
Amen. Thank y'all. Have a great week, great day.